Providers in Terraform are the first thing you define in your code when creating resources on various infrastructure platforms. So in this video, I'll be teaching you what are providers, how can you use them in your code, and how to create resources using different providers. Also a hands-on lab where I'll be showing you how you can create EC2 instance using AWS Provider and GitHub repository using GitHub Provider. So watch this video till the end. Let's start. Welcome to CloudChamp. In this video, we are going to learn about providers in Terraform. We will be looking at what are providers, how to use them, how to create different resources and providers. And this is all going to be hands-on. And we are going to create resources in AWS instance and also resources in GitHub. I'll show you how to create a GitHub repository using Terraform. And we will be posting all our code in that particular repository. So you can see this is a repository I created through Terraform. And I'll show you how to do that. Along with that, I'll also show you how to create EC2 instances and different stuff in this and also in the next video. So make sure you watch this video till the end. This video is the third video in our Terraform playlist. So if you haven't checked out the Terraform full course, do check out to learn Terraform from scratch. So let's start with providers. What do you mean by providers in Terraform? So providers are actually plugins that help you define or create resources in different platforms and cloud providers like AWS, Azure, GCP, Kubernetes, a long list of 3,000 different providers. And in simple terms, if I try to explain you this in very, very simple manner, if you want to create resources in AWS, use AWS as a provider. If you want to create resources in Azure, Azure as a provider. If you want to create servers, databases in Google Cloud, use Google as a provider. So let's try to use AWS as a provider and create some EC2 instances. I'm going to open my terminal and create a folder that we will be using throughout the Terraform playlist. I'm going to say mkdir and Terraform course. Let's open this in VS Code. So I'm going to open this in VS Code, Okay. I'm here in my VS Code and let's try to create some EC2 instances in AWS. And for us to use AWS with Terraform, we need to define AWS as a provider. So I'm going to create a new file, name it main.tf. The Terraform file should always end with .tf extension. So the task is to create EC2 instances. Let's try to imagine this and how we could be doing it if we were not using Terraform. So first thing we would do is to log in into our AWS console. And if we are logging it into console, we would be requiring username and password. But that is not what we use in our Terraform. So we need to define access key and secret access key. Secret access key. Okay. So these are the two things we require. And then we can start working with AWS, or we can log into AWS. We also need to have a user which has access to the particular services we are trying to create using Terraform. If this Nasi user does not have access to EC2, I cannot use the keys to create EC2 using Terraform. So make sure you have authentication and authorization done. Authentication means having the proper keys, and authorization means having permissions to use that particular service. So for me, I've already done it by using AWS configure command. If I show you, I have used AWS configure command to put my keys here. And this is the right way to do it, but you can also store it in your providers. Let me show you. So if I want to use AWS as a provider, I need to first declare it, and Terraform documentation says the same. So Terraform configuration must declare which provider they require so that Terraform can install and use them. So we need to first declare them and then install it to use it and create resources. So to use the particular provider, I need to click on it. So if I click on this, I'll be going to the provider page of AWS, which is managed by HashiCorp and has 1.8 billion installs. You can see more detail about the version. So this is the particular version of the provider. This is the latest version published 5 days ago. You can use any version you want. And if you want to use this with provider, you need to click on the use provider button. And you can read this. To install the provider, you copy and paste this code into your configuration. So there are two blocks here, Terraform block and there is a provider block. We use Terraform block to define what version of AWS provider do we want. And this is where you define the provider itself. If I want to use the latest version, I can choose 3 lines or just a provider block rather than having this. But if I want to use any particular version, let's say 5.7 or 6 or 1, I need to define that here in the version attribute. So let's just use these 3 lines here for now and paste it in our code. So I'm going to just comment this out because we know we require this. Alright, so provider AWS has been defined, but inside this there is configuration options. And if you go back to the documentation again, it says some providers require a configuration like endpoint URLs or cloud regions before they can be used, which is very much true. If I want to create resources or EC2 instance in AWS, I need to first select what region do I want to use. Do I want to use North Virginia or Mumbai or Pacific or anything like that? So I'm going to first define what is the region. The region is going to be US-East-1. And I'll show you how you can use multiple regions as well using provider, using alias attribute in provider in some time. But for now, we have defined region as US East 1. We can also define things like access key and putting the access key here as a string. Similarly, secret access key and putting it as here hard-coded in your configuration, which is not I would recommend. So I always want you to have it here in the AWS configure command and putting your keys here. If you don't know how to connect your Terraform with AWS, make sure you write down a comment and I can create a video for you to help you understand and properly connect your Terraform with AWS so you can start working with it. So this is not a good practice. I'm going to remove that, and you should always use AWS configure command to put your access key and secret access key. If you don't do this, you will not be able to create resources using providers. So now that I've added this, let's try to open a terminal. And to install your Terraform and to install your AWS provider or any provider, you need to run the command terraform init. This command is to initialize the directory, and I can show you what it does by just writing terraform, and then you can see the information. So init command is to prepare your working directory for other commands, and this is the same command you will be using to install AWS as a provider. So it says run terraform init after you add this configuration. So we have the provider defined now. Let's try to run that command, which is terraform init, and you can see it is going to install HashiCorp AWS 5.8.0 version because we haven't defined any previous version. We have just used this block. So it installed version 5.8.0. And once this is done, we will have some files present here and we will be ready to create resources. So let's wait for it to be successfully initialized and then we can start creating resources on AWS. So you can see there's a folder named as .terraform, and inside this there's provider, and inside this provider you have AWS version 5.8.0. And you can see it says Terraform has been successfully initialized. You may now begin to working with Terraform. Try Terraform plan to see what changes required for infrastructure, but this will only be applicable when we first write the configuration for our resource. So now we have successfully initialized it. Let's try to create a resource, which is going to be an instance. So everything you want to create using Terraform has to be resource. If you want to create instance, it has to be resource. If you want to create security group, if you want to create load balancers, RDS databases, S3 buckets, everything are resources, and you can use the documentation to properly see how to create them. So you can see this is the provider documentation and you will see the list of all the different services. Let's go to EC2 here. So this is EC2 or Elastic Compute Cloud, and I can see different resources like AMI, EIP, instance keeper. Let's try to use this instance, and I'm going to use this block here to create an instance. So we need to first create a resource block. So inside resource block, we need to define the resource type, which is AWS instance, and then we need to define some attribute. So let me explain you this attribute while we explore our console here. So if I want to create EC2 using console, I need to first go to the service. We are going to the service by selecting the resource type, which is AWS instance. Inside this, I'm going to click on launch instance option, and we have some attribute here. We need to select AMI, what operating system do you want. We also need to select what key pair to attach, what instance type to use, what should be my security group, what should be my storage, and so much things. So for AMI, you need to define what particular AMI you want. If I want to use Amazon Linux in my Terraform, I need to use this ID. If I want to use Ubuntu, I need to use this ID. And this is going to be different for everyone, so try to use your own. If you try to use this one, you will get invalid AMI error. So I'm going to copy this ID and paste it. And here you can see they're using data block, which we haven't learned about, so I'm going to remove that. For now, we will learn about data block later on. So I'm using my own AMI here, and I want to use T3 micro, or let's make it T2 micro. The instance type should be T2 micro. And you can see there are no other things like key pairs or security groups or network settings, because if you don't choose these things, the default option is to proceed without key pair, for key pair. If you don't choose any VPC, the default VPC will be selected. If you don't choose any security group, a default security group will be attached, and same for storage. So this is all we want. I'm going to save this and run the Terraform plan command to see what will happen or what is Terraform going to create. So according to the configuration, it should be creating an instance which should be Ubuntu. So this is Ubuntu AMI. We should be creating an instance type T2 micro, and it should have a name as hello world. This is the name instance will show. This is not the name. This is just the name for Terraform reference. So make sure you're not confused. So I'm going to run Terraform plan, and it should show me that one instance is going to be created. So let's run Terraform plan. It will show AWS instance.web is going to be created according to the Terraform configuration. If by any chance you're not seeing the same plan as I'm going to see, make sure you save your configurations, because Terraform is not going to show you unless you save it. So you see, it says one thing going to be added, and if I show you what is it, so it is AWS instance.web. I'll explain you more about plan command later on, but remember that whenever you see this plus symbol, green color, which means something is going to be added. If you are seeing red color minus symbol, which means something is going to be deleted. And if it is yellow color wavy symbol or the tilde symbol, it means something has to be modified. So here it is saying one has to be changed. And if you want it to be created here in your console, it should be, you need to run another command. So right now, if I show you, I don't have any instance named as hello world, and none of them are running. Once I create this, it will have a new I will have a new instance named as hello world, which will be T2 micro Ubuntu server in default VPC having default security group. So I'm going to say Terraform apply -auto -approve, and then this will create. It will start creating instance. You can see it says AWS instance.web.creating, and then you can see here the new instance has been created named as hello world, which is in pending state right now because it is still creating. After some time, when it is completed, it will go in running state. So let's wait for it to come up, and you can see it takes around like 30 seconds or 20 seconds to create and single EC2 instances. And now you can see it's still creating. It will give you the message 10 seconds after each seconds, 10 seconds. Let's refresh. And now you can see the instance is in running state. And I can see that this is default VPC. This is a T2 micro instance, Ubuntu server, same as what we have defined. So this is how you can create resources in AWS using Terraform. We have learned how to define a provider. What are providers? So provider are just used to define where should Terraform create resources. If it is AWS, you will be using AWS as a provider. If it is Azure, you will be using Azure as a provider. Let's try to add another provider. And to make things more clear, let's add another file named as provider.tf to hold all the providers that we are using in this configuration. So I'm going to say provider.tf, and I'll copy this from here, paste it here. I missed the spelling. I'm going to rename it and make it provider. Okay. So we are using provider, which is AWS. Let's try to create a repository. As I've mentioned, we can also create a repository using GitHub provider. So I'm going to say provider, and the name of the provider is GitHub. If you want to see the official documentation, you can check it from here. So let's go to providers, and a Git is a version control system. So I'm going to say VCS, and you can find GitHub here. So GitHub is by partnered, and you can see how to use it by checking the config. This is how you can use it. Inside the configuration, you need to add tokens or GitHub tokens. So you can get the tokens by clicking on the profile, going to settings, going in the developer settings below, and in here you will have options to create personal access token. You can create token classic and use that here. So let me try to create a new token, and I'll give this token some access. So a repo, I can make this valid only for 7 days. And I can also give access to delete the repository, which is here. Okay. And I can also give repository for organization, which is not necessary, but that's fine. So I'm going to now create generate token, and I'll add Terraform here as a name, and let's click on generate token. Once I click on this, I get this token, and now I'm going to use that in here. So I'll say token equals to this thing in double quotes. Okay. So now I've added another provider. If I want to install it, I need to say Terraform init, and it will then, okay. I think I didn't save this, or I didn't remove this. All right. Whenever you're using two providers with same name, you need to use alias that I have not defined. So I'm going to save, and now it should not show me the same error, and it should start installing GitHub provider. So you can see it is now installing provider for GitHub, finding and installing, and now it has been successfully initialized. So I can create a GitHub repository here as well. So let's create another resource, name it resource, and the name of the resource is going to be GitHub underscore repository. If you're in doubt anytime, you can always use the documentation. So I can have the documentation here by GitHub. You can see resources, and I can go to GitHub repository resource, which is here. And let's try to create a GitHub repository using this example here. So I'm going to just use this 4 lines and paste it. So resource is GitHub repository. This is the name of the resource. The name of the repository can be anything. Let's say my awesome GitHub repo. You can choose to use another name because this might not be available. So here in the description, I'm going to say this repo is created using Terraform. And now I'm going to close this because here you can see it gives you a syntax issue if you don't close it. So once I close it, let's run Terraform plan. According to the plan, it should say one repository is going to be created. And now when I run Terraform plan, you can see it's going to check the state file. We are going to learn about state as well. So once the state is checked, it is going to show that a GitHub repository.example will be created. GitHub repository.example will be created. And then if you're fine, let's go with Terraform apply command. So Terraform apply command, and then it will ask me, am I sure? So I'll type yes, and it will then create a GitHub repository in my profile. So let's wait for it to ask us. So I'm going to say yes as a value. Yes will be accepted. Once I do that, let me show you that a new repository will be created. So you can see my awesome GitHub repo has been updated now, and it has been created using Terraform. So this is awesome. You have now learned how to create repositories on GitHub using Terraform. We have used 2 different providers in this thing. We have used AWS Provider to create an EC2 instance. In AWS, we have also used GitHub Provider to create a repository using Terraform, which is awesome. I hope you have understood how Terraform works. Let's say you want to use another provider with the same name. There can be a situation where you are creating resources in US East, but also in US West or some other region. So if you want to use that, you need to define alias in provider. So I'm going to say AWS, and I'm going to say region is going to be US-West-2 or something else. You can use anything. But if I want to use the same provider, and if I try to run Terraform init command, you'll see what error I got. So I'm going to say Terraform init, and you'll see it says duplicate provider configuration. If you want to use the same name again and again, you need to use alias. Set the alias argument for alternative configuration. So in the alias, I'm going to say alias is going to be, let's say, West. So if I want to create a resource similar to this in different region, I need to define provider as provider is going to be AWS dot name of the alias, which is West here, right? So using this, I can create this resource in different region, and this is how you can define. You can define two same provider in Terraform. If you have any questions, any doubt, let me know in the comment section. I hope you have understood providers properly, and this is the documentation. The link is going to be there in the description. If you have any questions regarding providers, let me know in the comment section. In the next video, we are going to learn how to create different AWS resources like EC2, S3, VPC, RDS, IAM, and so much more. So make sure you watch the video. But using this video, you have learned how to create your EC2 instances. So I want you to practice along and try to create EC2 instance and GitHub using Terraform. So thank you and have a good day.